everyone. I am so glad that you are joining us today. And I have another guest that I want you to meet and know all about what she is doing. And her name is Ann Coleman. And she spent the better part of 2 years trying to help her teenage son who is struggling with anxiety, depression, and ADHD, which unfortunately led to drug misuse, trouble at school, and with law enforcement. She later figured out that it was her reaction to his behavior that was making the situation worse. So, in the 5 years since figuring out how to help him and repair the relationship, she is using those skills as well as her skills as an attorney to study adolescents from every angle and teach other parents how to avoid the mistakes that she made. She has a podcast, which is called Speaking of Teens. And she has some free parenting guides on her website, which I'm going to put links to. And she has a parent camp that is an online monthly membership where she helps parents there dealing with all sorts of things with their kids. And I am so excited to have her because even though you all know that teens are my clients, because teens are my clients, parents are also kind of my clients, even though they're not paying me to work with them because they have tons of questions. And so many parents are struggling with how to deal with all sorts of things. So, Anne, thank you for
Yes,
being with us. Tell us any more about yourself.
you're
And
welcome.
certainly, I want you to talk about your own story.
Sure. Well, I think you just about covered it. I mean, well, we you could add that I am also severely anxious and severely ADHD. So
Ah,
that did not help matters when I was trying to raise my teenage son. So that was probably the bulk of the problem, to be
yeah.
honest.
Yeah. Well, when all that stuff was happening and you were in the thick of it, you probably felt like other, I don't know what to do. Is there any help? Where you think, well, I know all parents think somehow it's their fault,
Oh yeah.
but you were probably also thinking, how do I fix my kid? Like, how
Oh
does my
yeah.
kid get fixed?
Oh, I mean, and honestly, I don't think I really did think it was my fault. I think I thought it was his fault. I mean, that was the big problem is
Yeah.
that I was like, just somebody fix this for me. Dear God,
Mhm.
what is going on? And I didn't understand at the time, I did not understand the teenage brain. I did not
Mhm.
understand that, they are irrational and they do take risk and they do crazy things and they all do that. But when you have a kid who has ADHD and anxiety on top of that, it's 10 times worse and they
Mhm.
they are less mature, their brain matures slower. It's, just all the things. And because of my ADHD and my anxiety, my behavior just exacerbated that. So
Mhm.
what happens is, when your kid is acting out and it triggers you,
Mhm.
then you meet that dysregulation with your own dysregulation, and then you have an explosion. And it is so counterproductive. So, what he was doing, I mean, when he was little, it was all about his ADHD. It was all about getting the schoolwork done and the teachers complaining that he wouldn't stay on task. And so our zone, we were just in the zone of get the schoolwork done, get him productive, make the teachers happy. So up through probably eighth grade, even eighth or ninth grade, it was all about that. We switched him from a private school at the end of eighth grade to public school so he could get an IEP or 504 or whatever he needed so that he'd
Mhm.
get more help because private schools aren't known for giving accommodations. And so we put him in public school. He's still in school with all the kids he knows. But and ninth grade was great. Ninth grade, they kind of keep them, segregated. Most schools kind of keep the ninth grade off by themselves and still treat them like kids. And then 10th grade hits, and a lot of things happen when a kid is 15
Mhm.
because you're getting all these kids are driving. They're
Mhm.
all, getting permits, or, some of them even in the same grade are already 16, and they're going all over the place and they're leaving and you have
Mhm.
life 360, but you still feel freaked out about it. And so that's when things kind of started escalating. He was going places and I was getting nervous. And what are you doing? And who are you with? And because at the end of the ninth grade year is when we've discovered that he had tried smoking weed.
Mm,
And so that was in the back of my mind every time he left the house. Oh my God, he's going to be out smoking weed. And he wasn't driving at the time, but I was afraid he was going to be with people and they were going to be partying and all this stuff. My brain was just reeling with what if and oh my
mhm,
God, and how can I keep him safe? And so my tension and my anxiety over that stuff caused me to overreact and try to
mm,
control his every move. And he, met that with, oh no, I'm going to do what I want to do because now you're getting over in my territory and back off, mom.
mhm,
And that cycle just continued for like, a couple of years at least.
mhm,
It progressively got worse by the end of the 10th grade year. And then, by the end of, I guess it was the end of his 11th grade year, going into 12th grade, is when we sent him to a residential treatment center because in that interim, we had gotten so off base with him. I was, just livid that he was still smoking weed, that he was trying different drugs. He was getting in trouble at school. He got almost expelled. He got suspended. He got sent
mm,
to an alternative school. I mean, it was just one thing after the other. And every time something happened, I blew up. And I say I because I leave my husband out of this because he was the calm one. It was
mhm,
me. I was blowing up and it never occurred to me why I was so triggered by all these things, why I couldn't be calm. It was just I felt out of control. I felt like he was out of control. We were going to psychiatrists, we were going to psychologists, we were going to counselors, and everyone, was talking about his behavior and what he needed to do. And they were basically giving up and saying, we don't know what else to do. We've tried all these medications, we've tried therapy, we've tried everything. And no one ever said, how are you guys communicating at home? How are you parenting him? What are you
mhm,
saying to him? How is your anxiety? How are you dealing with him when he is being this way? No one ever asked. And now looking back, that is insane
mhm,
because the whole, you can send your child to the best, therapeutic boarding school, the best residential treatment center, the best therapist, the best psychiatrist. But if you aren't changing your own behavior in the home, nothing's going to change. They can go away. They can learn all kinds of new things. They can learn all about themselves. And so, one Aaron Huey put it this way. He was on my podcast a while back. He said, you can send your kid off and you can teach them how to speak Spanish. But if everyone at home is still speaking French and you send them back to that French speaking home, they're just going to revert and start speaking French again.
yeah,
And it's so true.
mhm,
You can teach them all kinds of new things, but parents are the ones that have to learn.
mhm,
And, I can tell you that, when we got him to a residential treatment center, there was a therapist, family therapist there who saw that I had no idea how to talk to him, that
mhm,
I had no idea about my emotions, his emotions, what was going on. And he finally said, Ann, okay, you need to go read this book. It was No Drama Discipline by Dan Siegel, and it was for toddlers. And he just wanted me to read actually one paragraph, but he was trying to get me to understand how to validate my son's feelings and emotions and how to hold boundaries with him, he said. And I'm like, what are you talking about? So I
mhm,
started reading that book and I was like, oh my God, okay, I have missed the boat on everything. I think I'm kind of getting it now. And that was my light bulb moment. And then from that point forward, I started studying and learning this stuff and realized what I'd been doing, which I'm happy to share with you why I was the way I was.
mhm. Well, I was gonna say, how because you were said he went to all these counselors and therapists, and no one was saying, "What are you doing as a parent?" And so it was just this one counselor therapist who said, here's what you need to read. And then
Right.
you took all that in and actually did something with it. Because I
Well,
could also see a parent being like, well, that doesn't have anything to do with me and not doing it.
well, I think but I was in this headspace of desperation by
Yeah.
that point.
Yeah.
I wanted my son to be okay.
Yeah.
And I wanted all this stuff to stop. And so luckily, I was open to it. And what that book was really about, he doesn't say it in the book, but it's really about emotional intelligence
Mhm.
and emotion coaching and how the child's brain works. It's not specifically about teenagers, but it's how a child's brain works, and he explains it in basically the same way that you would need to know how a teenager's brain works.
Mhm.
But it was, it showed me that I was not looking for the underlying reasons for why my son was behaving the way he was behaving. And what I was focused on was just the behavior itself
Yep.
and wanting the behavior to stop. Why are you doing these things? Why can't you stop doing this? What's wrong with you? And what I wasn't searching for is, why is he doing these things?
Yeah.
Why does he need weed? Why does he feel like he needs to do these crazy things? What is it about what's going on that he needs help with? What do I
Mm.
need to teach him? What do I need to show him? All of that was beyond me. And I'll tell you why it was beyond me is because I didn't realize that my emotions were coming where from my own background, my own personal history. We don't just come into parenting like an empty vessel. We
Right.
have all this crap that we've been raised with, that we've learned along the way, that we've experienced. And so what happens is if our kid is doing something that maybe reminds you of something that happened a long time ago, or they're smoking weed and you knew someone that smoked weed that you didn't like, there are all
Mhm.
kinds of ways that our brain can take these little trips that will absolutely mess everything up for us
Mhm.
emotionally. So, what was happening with me is I had a brother who started smoking weed when he was about 12 years old, 12 or 13. And it progressed from there into him becoming a heroin and meth addict. And he
Mm.
died when he was in his early 50s, several years back. And so, that for me, I grew up in a home where my younger brother was a drug addict, an active drug addict. And I saw how my parents acted, which
Mhm.
was to me, they were enabling him.
Yeah.
They enabled him. It just kept coming and kept coming. And I hated him for it. And
Mhm.
I really think I really kind of resented them for allowing it to progress. So when my son started smoking weed, in the back of my mind, I was like, oh, hell no.
Mhm.
This is not happening to
Mhm.
my child. And as a matter of fact, I even put off having children for years because I was afraid of this very thing. And
Mhm.
it was subconscious. I didn't
Right.
really wasn't thinking about it at that time, but that triggered something deep inside me when I figured out that he was using drugs, that I it just turned this switch in my brain that no, no, no. I'm
Mhm.
stopping this right now. This is not going to happen. You're not doing this. And so every move I made from that point forward with him was as controlling as I could be, because I was looking in the back of my mind at my parents who didn't do enough. And
Mhm.
I was not going to be that parent. I was going to do what I had to do. And I was going to, by golly, make sure my kid was not going to turn into a drug addict. And
Mhm.
so that was all I thought about. So every time I tried to, get in his face and tell him he wasn't going to do something, or every time I said, no, you're not going there, and no, you're not hanging out with that person, and no, what are you doing over there? Hand me your phone. What's in your drawers over there? What are you putting in your pocket? All that stuff, it number one, it made him more anxious and it
Mhm.
made him more reactive. And the more I pushed and the more I controlled, the more he fought back, the more he rebelled, the more he hid things, the more disconnected we got in our relationship. So that if he needed to share something with me, or if he was afraid of something happening, or if he got off somewhere and needed me, he was not going to tell me.
Mhm.
I was not the person he could share anything with, because
Right.
I was trying to make him stop doing everything. So it was just, I did not get that. until I started, understanding emotions and understanding emotional intelligence and understanding the adolescent brain and understanding how it works and understanding how drugs can take over and, all these things. And once that all comes together in your brain, for me at least, it helped me to be able to learn then to regulate my own emotions. And for a lot of people, it takes a little bit more.
Mhm.
It may take, but I'm on good medication for one thing for anxiety. So with my medication and with what I learned and with that knowledge, that awareness of
Mhm.
what my brain was doing to me, it helped me to go, okay, so that's what it's doing. So I need to take a breath here and need to really think about my kid and what he needs from me and make sure that we're staying connected. And so it was just a whole new process of thinking, a whole new way of
Mhm.
being with him. And things started turning around like within weeks.
Yeah.
Within weeks, when he came home from the residential treatment center, they had him on bags of medication. Long story short, we ended up getting off all the medications. And within 6 months, I would say he was like almost like a new kid. Within a year, he was a new kid. And so, and it was a combination of things, of course, but it was, if I had not learned all this stuff,
Mhm.
it would have probably reverted back to the way it was before he went to residential
Yeah.
treatment. And residential treatment did a lot of planting seeds in his head about, the counseling and all that stuff. It really
Mhm.
planted the seeds. But when he came home, he was still upset. He was still having, he
Well,
had
he's probably
fits of
waiting for
rage.
that to happen again.
Yeah, he was. And that's it. They learn, they anticipate what's mom going to do, what's she going to say, and it triggers them even when you open your mouth then.
Right. Yeah, just seeing you
So,
probably
yeah,
could trigger him. So, did
exactly.
you work with someone who helped to teach you these things, or what did you just really read a book and decide to change your life?
I know that sounds crazy. I read the book and then I thought, okay, I got to learn about this emotional intelligence thing. And I read another book. I read Dan Goleman's book on emotional intelligence. And I went from there to studying the adolescent brain for about a year, just studying, reading scientific journal articles, reading textbooks, reading, studies on the brain
Good
and
for
and
you.
and writing a book for myself. So it was me, I mean, I just decided as I'm learning this stuff, I'm going to make notes. And then I was making notes and I thought, well, I've got to write down where that came from just in case I need to go back. So I started making citations. So I basically wrote myself a book about emotions, emotion theory, emotional intelligence, the adolescent brain, and all that stuff to
Mhm.
learn it all.
I love it.
Yeah.
Well, and everyone is different, and some people can. I am one of those people that can take information and teach myself because 'cause I'm just so open to that, and learner is one of my top 5 strengths, so I'm,
Oh, yeah.
taking in a lot of information, and so I am somebody who can do that, but I know there are a lot of people who need someone to kinda walk alongside them, to support them, and that's what you do, as well as what I do, though
Yeah.
my clients aren't the parents primarily, but
Right.
I do take a lot of calls and emails from parents of the
Oh, yeah.
clients I have where they are struggling with different things, and I help talk them
Right.
through some of this stuff. And so you took that information and now you are helping to support parents. So
Right.
tell a little bit about what you do in supporting parents with all this experience and knowledge that you have.
Okay. Well, I mean, you're right. I mean, everybody doesn't process information the same way. Everybody
Mhm.
doesn't learn information the same way. And, I don't know if I would have been open to that even, a year or 2 years before that. I don't know.
Mhm.
It just happened at the right time. But, you know, I've taken so much time and learned so much stuff. And everybody doesn't have that kind of time. And when you're
Mhm.
in crisis mode, and you're worried about your kid, the last thing probably on your mind is sitting down to read a book.
Mhm.
So you're right. I've taken all of this information and I've kind of distilled it down into the pertinent parts that everybody needs to know. And I mean, I deliver a lot of that stuff in my podcast.
Mhm.
And in parent camp, I call it the field guide, because it's a course that takes them through this process and for me, after, studying this stuff for so long and making all these notes and writing this book for myself and drawing diagrams and, writing little things on cards, I finally figured out that really what parents need to understand is like a four-part framework. And, first they need to understand how the adolescent brain works and
Hmm.
why their kid is doing the things they're doing, and including, kids who are anxious and kids who have ADHD, and learning why they do the things they do so that parents are more empathetic for
Hmm.
what the kid is going through. Because if you're not empathetic and you're just assuming they're doing these things to manipulate you, or
Hmm.
because they're bad, or just because they're immature and they need to learn more, then you're not going to be empathetic and you're not going to be open to doing the other things you need to do. And the second part I teach parents is you've got to learn how to regulate your own emotions.
Hmm.
And part of that is becoming more empathetic. Part of that is learning some methods. You're journaling your emotions, and meditation, mindfulness meditation is so freaking helpful. And just
Hmm.
learning more about how our thoughts impact our emotions and our behavior. So
Yep.
I teach a little bit about the cognitive triangle and how,
Hmm.
I was not even aware of what I was thinking.
Hmm.
So until you start thinking about your thinking,
Yep.
having a little metacognitive, process going on, until you start thinking about how you're thinking, you really don't know what you're thinking.
Right.
We all have that little inner voice in our head all day, chatter,
Yep.
chatter, 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 chatter. And until we stop to go, wait, what is it telling me? We don't pay attention to it. It's all kind of subconscious. So once we bring that to the forefront and we realize, oh my gosh, we were thinking that my kid's going to be just like my brother. My kid's just going to be a drug addict. Until
Hmm.
we realize those, then when we realize we're having those thoughts, then we can do something about it.
Yep.
And then, we can address it. So that's the second part of the framework, our own emotions. Third part I talk about is emotion coaching. This is something that most everybody out there these days who talks about parenting and how to parent a toddler or a teenager or whomever, they are talking about emotion coaching, but they don't call it emotion coaching. And I do, because I want to give the guy credit that started it. I mean, it was
Hmm.
Dr. John Gottman, who you may have heard of because he's also a relationship coach for
Yes,
marriages.
I love he and
Yeah.
his wife. Hmm.
Right, but he also, I think it was before the relationship stuff, he also studied children and parents. And
Mm.
he studied for 10 years and realized that the parents who did the best with their kids, the kids who had the best outcomes emotionally and, success in life, all this stuff, were the parents who emotion coached. And what that's about is validating your kids' feelings. It's about listening to them and not solving the problems for them, but helping them learn how to solve their own problems, and
Hmm.
having that connection and comfort when they're upset and throwing a fit about something. So that's something that is so that's what I learned first, and that's what I started doing first, and that made the biggest difference between me and my son. So that's in there. And then the last part is learning discipline, learning that disciplining teens, discipline means teaching, and it means that we're not just punishing. We Punishment does not work. It
No.
is all about teaching your kid when they don't know how to do something, helping them learn how to do it so they don't make the mistake next time.
Hmm.
We all learn by making mistakes. Teens make tons of mistakes,
Yep.
but they don't know how to not make that mistake until we help them learn how to not make that mistake.
Hmm.
So that's the fourth part of the framework. So that is the course that's in Parent Camp, and we just have meetups on a weekly basis, bring in experts, talk to each
Mm.
other, have community, and I help, guide through all the issues they're having and the problems. And if I had something like this back,
Oh, that would
several
have been
years ago,
perfect.
oh my God, I can't imagine. So it's a good thing. People enjoy it. People get a lot out of it. And that's
Well,
what I
you
love
have
doing.
a very active free Facebook page too, because
Oh
I
yeah.
am a member of that Facebook page and I am amazed at all the things that go on there. I mean, you could get so
Yeah.
much for free from there. So
Oh yeah.
it's amazing. And that's also a way for them to kind of get to know you better and your
Right.
style too as they get into your world and see what you're all about. I just love that so much.
Absolutely.
And one of the things that you are giving away is a parent guide that I'm going to put in the show notes, and it talks about like things like to think about, like giving them thoughts to think about when they're
Mhm.
getting upset or when their child's upset. And I love that because we aren't aware of what our thinking is a lot of times. And we need kind of like that stop and think about it. And those are things that I teach my teen clients. You know,
Right.
almost all the steps that you were talking about, that's what I do with my teen clients. Like I help them to understand how their brain creates that anxiety. Where is that coming
Right.
from? Those thoughts that come up that say, oh, well, everyone hates you and no one wants to sit by you and you're ugly and you're never going to figure it out. And I mean, we all have those.
Yep.
And just normalizing anxiety, because when you talk about validating feelings, we're taught, unfortunately, a lot of times, like, stop crying or don't be scared of that or don't worry about this. And that's all nice, or it seems nice, but then we start thinking, oh, well, I do feel this way. So what's wrong with me because
Right.
I am sad about this or I am worried about this? Or so I teach them a lot about the normalizing of everyone feels these things. And then looking at, okay, now that I'm thinking this, all thoughts are just a story we're telling ourselves. So if we're just telling ourselves a story, we can tell it differently. And we can tell the
Exactly.
story from like the hero's point of view. So I do a lot of, how the story that you're telling yourself that scares you, what story could you tell yourself and then start believing it? Because you don't want to make the story so crazy that or it's so happy and perfect that you can't believe
Right.
it. But like what is believable in this? And almost every time when a kid tells me they're afraid of something, I'll say, "Has that ever happened before?" "Well, no, but I'm afraid of it." I'm like,
Yes.
"Okay,
Oh
what's
my
the percentage
gosh.
that that's actually gonna happen?" And it's so low
Yeah.
that they start realizing, "Oh, I don't have to be afraid of that. I don't have to worry about that."
Right. Yeah, and it's the same for kids as it is for adults. You know,
Mhm.
we have those same thoughts. We have those negative thoughts. We have those fearful thoughts, and fear for our kids is what will get us in trouble the worst. And you would think,
Mhm.
if we're afraid for their future, we're going to do all these great and wonderful things. Well, no, that fear takes hold, and that's what makes you more controlling, more pushy, more everything, and it just causes a problem. So yes, we have got all of us need to pay more attention to that inner voice and what it's telling us, and then talk back to it and
Yeah.
tell it. And there's a trick I read in one it was a science, I think it was a study, or maybe it was just in a journal article, but talking to yourself in the third person and saying, "Anne, stop thinking that. That is not true. This is not going to happen, blah, blah, blah." But
Mhm.
talking to yourself in your head in the third person, or even naming your little, inner chatterbox something, maybe
Yes.
call it something, and tell it to shut up and back off. And, it is amazing how that can help, just talking
Mhm.
to yourself in your head. So, yeah, we all need to learn that, and teens
Yes.
especially need to learn it because they have so much. Their glass is usually half full because of the way their brain works during adolescence. They just
Mhm.
have a knack for going to the negative. So,
Mhm.
thank God for the work that you do because that
Yeah.
is so helpful for kids.
Yeah, and now all the stuff that I've learned and know about now as a grandparent, I'm like, "Oh my gosh, I can grandparent so well." And so I have
Isn't
a
that great?
2.5-year-old grandson and an almost 2-year-old granddaughter. And when they, have their little fits or get upset about stuff, I'm like, "Oh, you're really upset about that. Well, let's figure out what we need to do." And, just
Oh, I
making
know,
it,
that's so
I know
wonderful that
it
they are
is.
learning that from that age. I
Yeah,
wish I had known this stuff.
I
I mean,
know.
it's so wonderful to know it now, but it would have
Mhm.
been really handy back then to have known to start at that age.
Yeah,
So,
because 'cause I'm
yeah,
thinking,
new
"Oh,
parents have it better.
they're gonna get so much more out of
Oh,
life
yeah.
because they're
Oh,
gonna
yeah.
know this stuff." And one neuroscience scientist that I recently listened to, she talked about your wise self inside, like, so when you think about naming something, she talks about the wise self, and she even had this I think it was on Etsy. They made this little like rag doll that looked like her. And I thought, this is so, and she's like, I don't know, she's probably 60 years old and she uses her wise self to help her like learn things.
Oh,
And I'm
wow.
like, I am going to get a wise self made for all my grandkids. And then I'm going to talk to them about how this is your wise self. And when you're really struggling, what would your wise self say? And what
Yes.
because they do have a lot of knowledge inside, but they don't
Right.
realize it or don't feel like it.
Right,
So
right. Well, that I think that's a DBT, like dialectical behavioral therapy thing, isn't it?
probably,
Learning the wise self from the yeah. And I need to learn more about that. But that is, I think teaching kids that is really a good
mhm,
way to, instruct them and have them start thinking about this stuff early because
yeah.
then you recognize that voice, you know? I mean, I
Mhm.
went through all my teen years without
Oh,
recognizing
me
what
too.
I was thinking or what I was feeling. And Lord, it would have been so nice to understand those things early on. So, yeah,
Mhm. But yeah,
kudos
I
to
just keep
you.
thinking about like this generation can go into parenting at such a different level because they will have had all of this information about their emotions. And there's a lot of work to do because we're not doing enough in schools to teach that. But I think we're getting better. And I think we can just keep pushing for that to happen in school so that we have adults coming out, they come out of school as adults to go into the world and they already know this kind of emotional stuff
Exactly.
that we didn't know. So I'm hoping that that's what happens. But I
Oh,
am
yeah.
so glad that I had you on today. I enjoy visiting with
You.
you. I was on your podcast a month or two ago.
Yes, it was
That was
great.
fun too. I enjoy meeting so many people. But is there anything else you want us to know before we end today?
I would just say that if you are struggling with your teen right now and you're having a hard time, then, start looking inward a little bit and thinking about what it is, how you're responding to them, and learn a little bit about emotions, emotion coaching. If you even just Google it, you can learn about emotion coaching because if you're having blow ups with your kid, learning that one skill and then learning how to rein in your emotions a little bit can change so much.
Mm.
So, you can come join our Facebook group. You can get all the free guides. I've got a free guide on emotion coaching, but learn what you can about that, and that will make a huge difference.
Oh, I love that. Yes, definitely everyone get into that free Facebook group. It is amazing that it's very active. Parents are on there all the time. Anne's very active on it as well, which I love that
Yeah.
a lot of times when I'm on Facebook groups like that, you don't see the person that is the
Yeah.
moderator or the administrator very often, but Anne is in there every day talking to people, and I love that. So it's wonderful. Well, thank you for being with us today. I am so
Thank you,
glad that
Susie. I
you were
appreciate
here.
it.
I'm so glad that we got to know each other, and I'm sure we
Yes,
will see each other again.
I hope so. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.